I found someone worth my time. My name is David Morgan. I'm 46 years old, a civil engineer in Charleston, South Carolina. I was sitting in my home office, reviewing bridge inspection reports, when the email arrived from my wife of 14 years. The subject line was blank. No greeting, just two sentences. I've moved your inheritance into my personal account. It's better this way. Attached was a photo, blurry but clear enough. Sarah and some guy with a salt and pepper beard, on a hotel balcony, in what looked like Arizona sunset behind them. Fine glasses in hand, her smile brighter than any she'd given me in months. I read the email twice. $425,000 from my Uncle Robert, the man who'd raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 15. The man who'd worked overtime at the shipyard to put me through engineering school. The man whose last words to me were, "Build something that matters, David." I closed my laptop, walked to the kitchen, and made a cup of coffee. Looked out at the garden Sarah and I had designed together 4 summers ago. The brick walkway I'd laid, while she planted azaleas along the borders. All that work for a home she apparently wasn't planning to return to. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Did you get my email?" I typed back, "Yes, thanks for letting me know." 5 words. No drama, no questions, no begging for explanations. Her response came minutes later. "That's all you have to say." I didn't answer. Instead, I sat in the quiet kitchen, drinking my coffee, and realized something that should have upset me but didn't. For the first time in months, I felt calm. What Sarah didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. Sarah and I met 17 years ago at a construction industry expo in Atlanta. She was launching her organic skincare line, looking for engineers to design her first production facility. I was 7 years into my career, tired of designing parking garages and strip malls, hungry for projects with meaning. We married within 3 years, built a life in Charleston, where my firm had secured several major infrastructure contracts, bought the Colonial on Rutledge Avenue with the wraparound porch she'd always wanted. No children, her choice. "The business needs all my attention," she'd say. I understood. My bridges were my legacy. For 10 years, it worked. I designed, she built her brand, expanding from skincare to wellness retreats. We traveled, we entertained clients, we looked successful, on paper and in person. Then Uncle Robert got sick, liver cancer, aggressive and unforgiving. I took a 4-month partial leave to care for him in Colombia. Sarah visited once. "Hospitals drain my energy." She explained. I didn't argue. When Uncle Robert died, he left everything to me, through an irrevocable trust he's established years earlier. The money surprised me. I had no idea he's invested so carefully. Sarah seemed surprised too, suddenly interested in our financial planning, in ways she's never been before. "We should reinvest it in expanding production," she suggested one evening over dinner. "Scale the skincare line nationally." "I need to think about what Uncle Robert would want," I said. That was the first crack, small but visible. Others followed. Sarah started traveling more, for supplier meetings and retreat scouting. Her calls became shorter, often with background voices that went silent. When I asked who she was with, our neighbor Mrs. Chen mentioned seeing someone dropping Sarah off late one evening. "Thought you were in Colombia," she said casually. I had been. 3-day conference on bridge safety protocols. Then came the password changes. Banking apps suddenly required new logins. Conversations about finances that ended abruptly when I asked specific questions. One night, I found her on the back porch, voice low, laughing in ways she didn't laugh with me anymore. "Just Patricia from the studio," she said when she came inside. Patricia had left the business 6 months earlier. The foundation was cracking, and only one of us was honest about it. 3 weeks before Sarah left for what would be her final retreat, my firm's accountant called. "Someone's been trying to access information about your trust accounts," Jerry said. "Using your personal information, but failing the security questions." I thanked him, hung up, and sat at my desk for a long time. That evening, Sarah asked if we could streamline our financial management. "It's inefficient having so many separate passwords and accounts," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We should consolidate everything, for easier access." "You're probably right," I said. "I'll discuss it with the trust administrator." The next day, I drove to Columbia and met with Margaret Hayes, Uncle Robert's attorney for 30 years, and now mine. I explained my concerns without emotion or accusation, just facts. "Your uncle was wise to establish the irrevocable trust structure," Margaret said, after I finished. "The funds are completely protected, regardless of what happens in your marriage, and if someone attempted to access those funds without authorization," her expression hardened, "that would constitute attempted fraud, with serious legal consequences." I nodded. "I want to document everything, and set up monitoring that alerts us to any access attempts." When I returned home, Sarah had packed for her retreat. She kissed me briefly before leaving. "Already distant. I might extend this trip." she said at the door. Really immerse myself in that practice. I helped load her car, watched her drive away, then went inside and opened our shared cloud storage. In a folder labeled Business Expansion Ideas, I found what I was looking for: documents she'd forgotten to delete. Screenshots of my account information, notes about transfer protocols, a photo of a whiteboard with figures showing my inheritance amount, minus 15% processing fee explanation. She'd been planning this for months. I closed the folder and felt that strange calm settle over me again. The betrayal wasn't shocking. What surprised me was my own clarity. For the first time in years, I saw our marriage for what it had become: a transaction she was now terminating, because something more profitable had appeared. By the time her email arrived 5 days later, I had already set everything in motion. After receiving Sarah's email, I waited exactly 24 hours before taking action. No emotional response, no desperate calls, just methodical steps. First, I contacted Jerry and Margaret, forwarding them Sarah's email with a simple note: documentation requested. Both confirmed receipt within an hour. Then I called Robert Chen, a divorce attorney Margaret had recommended during one of our hypothetical conversations months earlier. His secretary scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. By 2 p.m., Sarah had texted, "Aren't you going to respond?" I replied, "I did yesterday. I mean, really respond. We need to talk about arrangements." I didn't answer. Instead, I drove to Robert's office downtown, where Margaret joined us via video call. "The attempted transfer creates multiple advantages for your case," Robert explained, reviewing the evidence Margaret had sent. The funds were inherited, properly maintained in trust structure, never commingled with marital assets, and she's now openly admitted to attempting unauthorized access. "What's next?" I asked. "File immediately." Citing financial misconduct, South Carolina takes fraud in marriage seriously when there's documentation. I signed the paperwork. Before leaving his office, at 4:45 p.m., my phone rang. Sarah's name on the screen. "You're overreacting," she said, without preamble. "This doesn't have to be complicated." "I agree," I said. "Then let's handle this like adults. The money's already moved. Fighting it will just drain more, through legal fees." "Where are you staying?" I asked. Changing the subject, she paused. "What does that matter?" "Just curious where home is now." "David, focus. We need to discuss financial arrangements. I'm having my lawyer prepare settlement papers. It's cleaner for both of us this way." "Who's your lawyer?" "Stephen Martinez. He's already reviewing everything." I wrote down the name. "That's helpful. Thank you. Are you even listening? This doesn't have to be difficult." "You've said that twice now." Another pause. "What are you doing?" "Getting used to the situation, I guess." I could hear her relax, misreading my calm as resignation. "It's really for the best," she said, softening. "We've been growing apart for years. This is cleaner than pretending otherwise." "You're right," I agreed. "Cleaner is always better." After we hung up, I called Robert back and gave him Stephen Martinez's information. Then I sent Sarah a text taking time to process everything. "We'll be in touch when ready." Her response was immediate. "Don't take too long. Papers will be ready by Thursday." Thursday, 3 days away, perfect timing. That evening, Margaret called with an update. "The trust monitoring system recorded 4 separate access attempts today. All properly blocked and documented. The IP addresses traced to Scottsdale, Arizona. Not a wellness retreat." I said, "Definitely not. There's more." The system flagged suspicious activity from 6 weeks ago. Someone exported account details and transfer protocols. "While logged in through your home network, we have timestamps and device identifiers." I thanked her and hung up, walked through the house that now felt more like evidence than a home. In the study, I opened the bottle of 18-year-old Scotch Sarah and I had been saving for our 15th anniversary, poured a measure into a crystal glass. Sarah thought she was setting a trap. She had no idea she's walked into one I'd prepared months ago. The next morning, Stephen Martinez called. His tone was professionally cautious. "Mr. Morgan, I'm representing your wife in your separation. She's indicated you're amenable to a straightforward settlement." "Is that what she said?" "She mentioned you understood the financial realities." "Which realities specifically?" "The division of assets, including recent inheritance funds." "She's provided documentation showing successful transfer of these funds." "Has she shown you confirmation of these transfers?" "She's indicated confirmations are forthcoming from the financial institution." I made a note. "Has she also mentioned the structure of the inheritance? The irrevocable trust established by my late uncle? The legal impossibility of what she's claiming?" Long silence. "Mr. Martinez, I suggest you verify the information you've been given. My attorney will send relevant documentation to your office today." After hanging up, I drove to First National Bank, where Sarah and I had maintained our personal accounts for 8 years. The manager, Patricia Williams, had handled our mortgage refinancing 3 years earlier. I need to review recent activity on all joint accounts, I explained. After she welcomed me into her office, Patricia pulled up our information. Her expression shifted as she scrolled. There have been significant withdrawals over the past 4 months. How significant? She turned the monitor toward me. Regular transfers from our joint account to an external account I didn't recognize. Small at first, $3,000, $5,500, then escalating. The most recent $52,000, 3 weeks ago. This receiving account, I asked, pointing to the number. Is it with First National? Patricia checked. No, it's external. Mountain Vista Credit Union in Arizona. I'd never heard of it. Can you print the transaction history for the past 8 months? While waiting for the printouts, I received a text from Robert Chen Martinez requesting urgent meeting. Tone significantly different. By the time I returned to Robert's office, the picture was becoming clear. The Mountain Vista account had been opened 10 months ago, in Sarah's name only. The address listed was a condo in Scottsdale. Total withdrawals from our joint accounts, $195,000. She's been building a new life for quite some time, Robert observed. While still having access to mine, I added. We were reviewing the bank records when Robert's assistant announced Stephen Martinez was on the line. I've received the trust documentation. Martinez said, his voice tight. My client appears to have misrepresented certain aspects of the financial situation, including her ability to access or transfer trust funds. Robert asked. That appears to be the case. Given this new information, I believe it would be beneficial to discuss a revised approach. My client has already filed for divorce, citing financial misconduct. Robert replied. The documentation speaks for itself. After the call ended, Robert looked at me. He'll drop her as a client. By end of business today, no reputable attorney wants to be associated with attempted fraud. What about the money she actually took from our joint accounts? We'll include full restitution in our demands. Document everything. Let her explain to a judge why she established a secret residence and systematically drained marital assets. I nodded, feeling strangely detached. The betrayal went deeper than I'd imagined. This wasn't impulsive, it was calculated, planned over months. While she shared my bed, my meals, my life. There's one more thing, I said. I need to know who he is. Robert nodded. I'll have someone look into it. That evening, my doorbell rang, the courier with an envelope. Inside was a letter from Stephen Martinez, formally withdrawing as Sarah's legal representation. Attached was a note from Robert. First Peace Falls. My phone lit up minutes later. Sarah calling. I let it go to voicemail. She called 4 more times before texting, "What did you do?" I didn't respond. Instead, I had dinner, a simple pasta dish I'd learned to make during my bachelor days, and received an email from Margaret with subject line "Investigation complete." The trust company had finished documenting the unauthorized access attempts. Multiple failed attempts over 4 months, all captured with IP addresses and timestamps. They'd referred the matter to their legal department for potential criminal investigation. No action required from you, Margaret wrote, but be aware this option remains available. I forwarded everything to Robert. Just after 9 p.m., another text from Sarah, "We need to talk immediately." I replied, "Through your new attorney. When you find one, you're completely overreacting." I was angry when I sent that email. I didn't actually move anything. The access logs suggest otherwise. Long pause. What access logs? Instead of answering, I sent one question. Who is he? 25 minutes passed. Finally, this isn't about him. Name. Another pause. Jason. But he's just a friend, helping me through this transition. Last name, Winters. He's not important. You're focusing on the wrong thing. I didn't respond. A quick search revealed Jason Winters, wellness consultant and former financial advisor, based in Scottsdale, left the investment industry 4 years ago to pursue authentic connections. The next morning, Mrs. Chen stopped by while I was getting my mail. "The man you asked about, who dropped Sarah off," she began. "Would you recognize him again?" She nodded. "Tall, distinguished beard. Drives a silver bomb. Happened maybe 6 or 7 times while you were traveling." I showed her the photo from Sarah's email. "This him?" She studied it carefully. "Yes, that's definitely him." I asked if she'd provide a written statement. She agreed, without hesitation. At 11 a.m., Robert called. "We have a complication." Sarah's hired Victoria Barnes. Barnes had a reputation for aggressive family law, expensive but effective. She's requesting an emergency hearing to contest the financial misconduct claims, Robert continued. Says her client has evidence all financial decisions were discussed and agreed upon. When's the hearing? A Monday morning, 4 days away. I thought about the condo in Scottsdale, the Mountain Vista account, Jason Winters who'd been in my house while I was away. Let's give Barnes something substantial to consider, I said. That afternoon, Robert delivered a comprehensive package to Barnes' office. Trust access logs, bank records showing systematic withdrawals, the Scottsdale condo lease, Miss S. Jen's notarized statement about Jason's visits, and screenshots from Sarah's business folder, showing her notes on accessing my accounts. By 5 p.m., Robert received a call from Barnes, requesting an urgent settlement meeting. She's seen enough, Robert told me afterward. Offered immediate terms. Sarah keeps what she already took. Makes no further claims on anything else. Counteroffer, I said. She returns 3/4 of what she took from joint accounts and signs a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, I don't pursue fraud charges. Robert raised an eyebrow. You could demand full restitution. I don't want everything back. I want this finished. The morning of what would have been our emergency hearing, Sarah and Victoria Barnes arrived to find Robert waiting, with a settlement agreement already prepared. No courtroom drama, no public spectacle. I waited in the conference room while Robert explained the terms. Sarah would transfer $146,250, 3/4 of the money taken from joint accounts within 48 hours. She would make no claims against the inheritance or any other assets. She would sign a non-disclosure agreement, preventing public discussion of our marriage or divorce. In exchange, I would not pursue criminal fraud charges related to the attempted trust access. Through the glass walls, I watched Sarah's face as Robert presented the evidence file. Her expression shifted from defiance to shock to something approaching defeat. She glanced toward where I sat, then quickly looked away. Barnes reviewed everything, conferring quietly with her client. Sarah nodded slowly, shoulders sagging. They entered the conference room 10 minutes later. My client accepts the terms, Barnes stated formally. Robert slid the agreement across the table. Sarah signed quickly, her signature shaky. I signed my portion, then pushed a separate envelope toward her. What's this? She asked, the first words she'd spoken directly to me. Passwords, I said, for the house alarm. Cloud storage, everything you might need to collect whatever you left behind. Her eyes met mine for the first time, searching for anger or satisfaction. Finding neither seemed to disturb her, more than either would have. It was never really about the money, I said quietly. Barnes touched Sarah's elbow, guiding her to stand. She clutched the envelope as they left, without looking back. 8 months later, I sold the house on Rutledge Avenue. Too many rooms designed for a life that no longer existed. The new owners, a young couple with twin toddlers, fell in love with the wraparound porch and the azaleas along the brick walkway. I moved to a modern condo downtown, walking distance to my firm's office, bought less furniture, kept fewer things. Margaret helped me restructure Uncle Robert's inheritance into a foundation supporting engineering scholarships for kids who'd lost parents. The first recipient was a 19-year-old young man from the mountains, whose essay about designing infrastructure for underserved communities impressed the selection committee. Robert would have been proud, Margaret said. When we awarded the scholarship, I thought about my uncle, often his practical wisdom, his insistence that creating something worthwhile required both vision and vigilance. One afternoon, checking mail in my building's lobby, I found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a cashier's check for exactly $146,250 and a brief note, the rest of what I owed. No signature, none needed. That evening, I walked down to the harbor, where Sarah and I had once talked about collaborating on a retreat center, a project I would design, she would operate. A dream that had died long before our marriage had. I sat on a bench, watching container ships navigate the channel, the check still in my jacket pocket. Tomorrow I would deposit it into the foundation account. Another scholarship, another chance to build something that might endure. My phone buzzed with a text from Jerry. Dinner still on for 7, bringing that structural engineer I mentioned. I checked my watch. Just enough time to walk home, change, and decide to say yes to whatever possibility awaited. I texted back yes, and stood to face the evening. Sometimes the strongest response to betrayal isn't revenge or even justice. It's the quiet work of rebuilding something better. From what remains, Uncle Robert had been right about one thing: what matters isn't what gets torn down, but what you choose to build in its place. And sometimes, if you're patient enough and wise enough, what you build is stronger than what you lost. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe to check out more stories on my channel.